Welcome to Let's Be Heard, where we're having unfiltered real talks about women's health. I was so sick of feeling like women's health was a dirty topic and a stranger in my own body. So why not create a space for women to discover, relate, learn, and feel empowered? So that's what I do. I break down barriers, share stories, and create the health dialogue we wish we had growing up. I'm your host, Maddie Holman, a women's health advocate and also a VC investor. Disclaimer though, this podcast is intended to be information only. That means this is not a source of medical advice. We aim to share stories, awareness, and resources available, but for any medical advice, seek out your provider. Hi, Simi. Welcome to the podcast. Really excited to have you on.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Thrilled to be here.
I always love to start out every episode with going into your personal health journey and how that shaped who you are and what led you to build Systole Health.
Yeah, well, it's a story that, I don't know, for me, if we're really talking personally, goes way, way back. I was born into a family of physicians. My parents were both physicians. And although they were really busy, they were very happy and fulfilled. And so I was drawn to it very early. My mother actually just sent me a little photo of me as a 2-year-old or something in a doctor costume for Halloween. So I knew early on that I was drawn to it, even if I didn't completely know what I was getting myself into. And then as time went on and I became an adult and could read about healthcare, I understood that there was a much bigger context and system, and it was messy around medicine that I could tell medical school wouldn't teach me how to grapple with that. So once I learned that there was such a thing as MD MBA programs, I thought, wow, that would be an amazing way to go get a skill set to what I thought would be have just a different career within a traditional type of setting in a health system, maybe working on quality and improvement, population health, that kind of thing. So I loved medical school. I actually briefly thought I was going to be a neurologist. I was really drawn to some of the fascinating science about how our brain works at the time, but ultimately fell in love with cardiology and then really unexpectedly encountered the curveball of just startup exposure in business school and saw a lot of overlap with medicine. I mean, people working in teams, taking big swings at problems, having to be really, really gritty, but also hypothesis driven and persistent. So I was interested, but still went on to do my training, which for me, timing is everything. It just happened at this unique moment, right as the pandemic began, right as I had my first child. And I'll never forget it. I mean, I was a cardiologist, but we were in the COVID ICUs. There were people dying everywhere. And we were so desperate to just get back to normal. And once that moment came and all these restrictions were lifted, I just saw a lot of people come back to clinic navigating these 6 to 12, sometimes longer waits. And that women, we know that 50% of women delayed care last year, that a lot of the female patients that I'd known for years, they were coming back physically unrecognizable because of weight gain, unrecognizable because of their numbers, blood pressure, cholesterol. Some had developed new cardiovascular conditions. And they always say, go into a field where you can see your grandparents in the patients you're taking care of and make sure that you're really connected and that there's an authentic sort of passion and purpose there. And my own grandmother, she did struggle. She had multiple heart attacks. Her family had a big history of a inherited condition called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And so it was really sad and frustrating to see women having put everyone before them and then coming in sicker, and their care was so much more complex. So I became interested in women's cardiovascular health at that time, just very naturally. But then in the back of my head was also noodling on what are the ways that we can broaden access for women, given that 87% of my field is male. And I think it's something like over 55% are close to retirement age. So those are some of the questions that set me on this different pathway from some of my peers who are mainly researchers. They're cardiologists, but they do a lot of research towards doing something more pragmatic and building Systole, as well as getting into women's heart health.
I love that backstory. I think very similar in terms of thought I was going to go down the pre-med route. I just pivoted med school, went to business school. And so that's really amazing though that you found your passion for it. And I'm very surprised at the number for how many women are in cardiology. That's blows my mind.
It's gotten better, but we still have a long way to go.
Yeah. And before diving into what you're building, how it works, just wanted to set the stage a little bit for especially audience that may not be as familiar
Mhm.
or as technically proficient in medical terminologies. For those that may not know, what does exactly cardiology do and what does it cover and why is a one size fits all model
Yeah.
not work for women?
That's such a great question. Such a good question. So, you have primary care and specialty care, and cardiology is a specialty. But one of the things that drew me to it is that it's a specialty with an enormous amount of breadth and depth. So, we cover, as a general cardiologist, and by that I mean I haven't further subspecialized into things like advanced heart failure or electrophysiology, which is arrhythmias. In general cardiology, a lot of the time, some of our work might overlap with what our colleagues in primary care are doing. We're trying to
Mm.
address all the risk factors, do the hard work of preventing that first heart attack or that first stroke by controlling blood pressure, controlling LDL cholesterol, weight, and insulin resistance. However, what I love about it is that that's just one side of the spectrum, prevention. On the other side, you can take care of people who are very sick, who have disease, heart failure, coronary artery disease, stents, surgery, pacemakers, heart failure, everything. And so it's a very, I think, rich field that is intellectually stimulating. That's great for the individual cardiologist. But I think in terms of just thinking about purpose and impact, it's still the leading cause of death for women. It's also the
Mm.
leading cause of death for men. And it's stunning that that's still the case in 2025, but because we've had so many incredible advances in medical therapy, but it just speaks to the scale of the problems that we grapple with in cardiology. So big spectrum, that's what we do day in and day out. Some people work more in the hospitals or in even higher acuity settings like ICUs that are dedicated to heart health. And others like me are more in the trenches in the clinic trying to help people who hopefully never get to that point that they're hospitalized. Now, why is this pertinent to women? Does one size fit all not really apply to women? Well, I think one of the things that was not part of my training, and I can venture a guess is not part of the training for the vast majority of cardiologists who are male, is that women, there's a lot of biological considerations for
Mm.
women, just factors, by virtue of being women that affect their risk for heart disease as well as their experience of heart disease itself. And so just as I think what we see is that kind of impact of just being a woman on your risk and on heart health is really different at different life stages across the entire life course of any woman. And so when we're young, even like pre-reproductive years, it's things like premature menarche when your period starts, or having conditions like polycystic ovarian syndrome that no one thinks of as cardiovascular, but turns out to be
Mm.
a very common risk factor for heart disease later. Just a little
Wow.
bit later, when you're having babies, the reproductive years, there's so many things that can happen in pregnancy, preeclampsia, gestational diabetes, gestational hypertension, infertility. I mean, there's been so much innovation in the infertility space in women's health, but who is informing all of those patients or users or members, whatever you want to call them, that they're at risk for heart disease? And then menopause is a time when heart disease risk, as well as heart disease itself, really accelerates. And so I think this reality is why there are a handful of women's heart health centers
Mm.
where this is the focus that have popped up at various health systems across the country. But they usually just consist of a handful of clinicians who have really focused expertise, and their wait times tend to be very long. They are in high demand. So one size definitely doesn't fit all, but I think we have a lot of work to do in terms of making that kind of more tailored care more accessible.
I completely agree with you on that. And also the fact that when you look at healthcare too, there's just that constant problem with burnout and less people going into certain fields in healthcare, which I don't blame them after certain things that have gone on, especially the pandemic. It was tough. I can't even imagine what you had to deal with in the trenches, but it's sometimes a thankless job and there's that constantly. So, how do you meet that demand of helping people so that they're not to that late stage of it's so far gone, but then also maximize the provider's time so that they can also provide the best care?
Right. No, I mean, that's the million dollar question. I think that I think that primary care, they have not been able to figure this out. And I don't envy my friends in primary care. I mean, I have a friend that I caught up with recently. She sees over 100 patients a week. And when I talk to her, the spirit and the sparkle that was there even in residency, a time that most people think of as the hardest time, is gone. It's blunted.
Wow.
And I think part of it, of course, the hours are long, the work is hard, but I think at another level, it's the demoralization of not knowing that you are capable intellectually, physically of helping someone in a more complete way, but not being enabled to do it. And so what have people done? They hire. I talked to one division chief of cardiology who said all he does is hiring, and that he hired 17 cardiologists last year and it still wasn't enough to meet demand.
Wow.
So there's that approach, and it's very understandable, but it's a zero-sum game. Our workforce is shrinking, it's not expanding. Maybe at best it'll be stable. There's just not enough physicians. And even when you add what we call advanced practice practitioners to the mix, these are the nurse practitioners or the physician's assistants, that they're in limited supply as well. And they often have a narrower scope of practice. They don't work 5 days a week, or they only see patients of a certain complexity and everything. So hiring is certainly one way to go about it, but everyone is competing for the same available hands to bring on deck. And then the other things people have done are they try to just cram more appointments into the day. So that might be shortening appointments. And a colleague of mine at a very prestigious health system, she shared about a year ago that they were informed overnight on email that they would have a massive reduction in their time with patients from 60 minutes to 30 minutes for a new patient and 30 minutes to 15 minutes for an established patient, And
Wow.
I mean, I think process matters. Obviously, people felt totally taken aback and unprepared for that, and obviously, therefore, bitter and resentful. But those are usually the only other way that people try to cram more appointments in the day are double booking, triple booking. And sure, there might be a no-show rate of 25%, but there are appointment slots where everyone shows up and then you're one person, and how can you possibly run on time? So I think that those are the usual approaches. We're living in the AI era. Everyone's hoping that AI will fix it all. And I, as really early adopter of AI tools just in my day-to-day as a founder, as a mom, as a person, I'm just as excited as the next person. But as a practicing physician, using the AI tools available to me, like these AI scribes, has it meaningfully improved access? I'm not sure. So these are the solutions that have been thrown around, and part of the reason why we ended up with Systole, because we thought it might help do things a little bit differently.
I completely get that. And I'm on the same page with you about AI. I remember back when it first came into the startup ecosystem and everyone was saying, oh my gosh, it's going to steal all the jobs of doctors. We're not even going to need them anymore. And coming from family where I have two parents as physicians, they were just like, no, that's absolutely not true. And as I've gotten older too and have been in the space, there are some things that AI does really well, like back office admin, if it fits into the workflows of
Right.
physicians. That's the key thing. But at the end of the day, you want an expert decision maker, which are the providers themselves or other healthcare professionals who have done the training, who have the experience. So
Right.
I completely understand that. And I think it's a good segue into
Yeah.
your platform, how your care model works. Would love to just walk through that and really just that patient journey and also the conditions that you address.
I mean, I think that once I got deep enough into this and saw how broken everything is and the sort of available solutions, how inadequate they are, a lot of, as with any sort of startup journey, there was a lot of serendipity that took place. So I happened to run into a friend who is a primary care physician who was building a small program within our health system around a different model of care called group visits or shared medical appointments. And he was doing this work with diabetes and hypertension. And it was amazing to see. I got to drop in on a few sessions and really go deep with him and hear about how it worked. But basically, rather than a physician seeing patients one at a time in this model, a physician working alongside some kind of supportive provider, like a coach, could see many patients at once and see them for longer and provide education, coaching, as well as a little bit of medical management in a reimbursable format. So when I saw that, I thought, wow, this is a no-brainer. This is a no-brainer. It's workforce transformation. It's a many to one unit economics little trick that might be the answer in certain conditions, chronic conditions where patients need many more touch points than we can
Mm.
provide. I mean, I was just in clinic yesterday, and if we had one of our new patients come back for a 3-month follow-up, I mean, that's a very early, aggressive follow-up time course. But just look at patients with diabetes. The guidelines recommend quarterly A1C checks and
Mm.
evaluations if they are not controlled, which is a lot of people. And that so rarely happens. So we just don't have the capacity. Anyway, I saw my friends' work and I was really inspired. And I could see that it was hard to operationalize for our health system.
Mm.
He had great data, clinical outcomes, patient experience. He was amazing. But in this big health system that has to be doing one-on-one care and there's like such a big lumbering operation, it was really hard to grow beyond him. And it's grown a little bit, but it's still really fueled by his energy. So that's when the idea occurred to me that maybe there is room for a platform to be built that would enable deployment of this powerful care model at scale without health systems having to devote a ton of budget or resources, build it from scratch, recreate the wheel, et cetera. So that's sort of where the kernel of the idea of inspiration came for Systole. And then I ended up teaming up with an amazing woman who's now my co-founder and ride or die, Lauren McConnell. She brings the operational expertise, got her career start at One Medical and worked at a number of other startups, including Hey Jane. So she was so well versed in virtual care operations and had worked in health systems like Mount Sinai. So we teamed up together and we were like, okay, let's just test this out in consumers to start, see, do they like it? How long? What kind of content to cover? And we just went out there and started doing purely organic, did not pay a single dollar social media marketing, primarily on TikTok, where our goal was to reach women in midlife who are at risk for heart disease. And that is exactly who we reached. I mean, to the T. And we were able to run a number of groups, really refine the experience before raising a little bit of capital to enable us to start to go to market with health systems. And so we're early in our journey there, but have our first partnership that we've been implementing. And so that basically in that setting, what we're trying to do is help them, help our partners experience the value of group care. And that might be different for different partners. I think there's definitely an operational dimension to the ROI where by offloading to a group care platform like ours, you can increase patient throughput. I mean, it's what people envision when they hire an NP or a PA, but we can take on 4 or 5 times as many patients in a week as an NP or
Mm.
PA just by the virtue of our model being many to one. So they can get more new patients in. Those new patients will need testing and care that will be helpful for the health system. And then for the patients who've been offloaded to us, we can sort of keep them very engaged in the health system at a time when doing that is very hard and they're often struggling with leakage. So there's that operational use case. Obviously, improving clinical outcomes as a physician, selling to other physicians is something we all care about. And then there's the patient experience. I think that we just talked to a health system recently that's investing in sort of some consumer type of ways to reach out to patients that they've lost or that they haven't been able
Mm.
to connect with. And a lot of those patients are exactly who we have a lot of experience with. The women going through menopause, all their risk factors are blowing up. They feel like, what is going on? And how come I can't get 2 minutes with my primary care doctor to go over this? It's an interesting time for health systems, a difficult one, but one where this capacity multiplier can be really helpful. And so we're excited. We're excited to be in this space at this time.
I love it. And so many questions, but that's incredible. And I completely get it with the health systems. It's really having to first create it outside of it because it's so ingrained in that system of how it's done that, and there's just so much bureaucratic red tape trying to get through it.
Totally.
So that's amazing that now that you've had that and are starting to work and integrate with them. I love that. And I think sometimes when I've seen, especially in the women's health space for startups, sometimes going straight in and trying to go to the health systems, whereas that may not always be the best. You may need to do it on the outside and then go in and show them how it works. But I'm curious from the users and the patients that go through your care model, how are they in terms of the group model versus individual care?
Yeah.
What has been their feedback? And I guess also, how do you deal with HIPAA? What do you talk about in the group setting or what goes on versus in individual?
Great question. So, and that allows us to get a little bit more detailed about our patient experience and journey. So, basically, the way we've set things up, there are a lot of ways to do group visits. There are a lot of ways that people have done group visits. We ended up choosing to go with 60-minute virtual group visits featuring a group of 5 to 8 women meeting with a physician and a health coach. We felt physician was important because, first of all, it's affordable in this many to one model, unlike a lot of the virtual care tech-enabled services companies. It's actually affordable, which is helpful. Pragmatically speaking, reimbursement's higher, but also trust. Trust is so important. I trust my APP colleagues, right? But I recognize that it might be different for a health system that we're trying to partner with or for a group of patients that don't have some previous context for that provider. So we have that dyad meeting with the group of patients. And first, we start off with a one-on-one onboarding call with the physician and the patient, which is a good opportunity to build trust, start a relationship, but also some key medical things. Review the medications, review recent data, go over goals, go over current lifestyle, et cetera. And so, and sketch out a care plan. Then that patient gets placed into a group, usually based on availability first, but we're excited as we get to larger and larger volumes that we can start to refine group cohort formation based on other characteristics, not just availability. And then they go through 6 virtual visits, group virtual visits that are weekly. Those we designed in the first version for, let's just say, this archetype woman in midlife starting to encounter cardiovascular risk factors. Maybe she has a family history and she really wants to prevent heart disease. So we cover all of the major domains or sources of risk for women with respect to heart disease, and a big chunk devoted to lifestyle as well. And so each session is set up so that within the 60 minutes, 10 minutes are physician-led education, everything that we wish we could stuff into a 15-minute follow-up visit, but simply cannot. And then the rest of the time, the coach is with everyone in the Zoom while the physician goes into a breakout room and meets with each patient one-on-one for some very targeted medical management. And so that helps with a number of things. Number one, making enough time for everyone to get time. But number two, with that privacy issue, we have experimented with so many different versions of this model. And we found that when the patient and physician could meet one-on-one, it was different. And they were a little bit more forthcoming, and you didn't have to worry about people going off the rails or saying something that made someone else feel uncomfortable, et cetera. And we also incorporate an informed consent process up front so that they really understand the format and how it all works. How have patients received this? We try to keep a running list of the things that gets us out of bed in the morning. And patient said she already had a cardiologist in primary care, and she was like, this should be standard of care in every specialty. And she's like, I just don't understand why it isn't. A bunch of the other feedback had just been that if anything, they wished it had been longer. So we started offering optional drop-in group visit maintenance sessions, which a lot of patients in our community have joined at least one, some because they're still under care, some because they just want that community and accountability. But now in the partnership setting, we're actively looking at really extending the duration of our program to provide more value to our partners and really be able to help them close outcomes gaps that are meaningful at a population level.
I think that makes so much sense, and I love that model where you get the best of both worlds and also flexibility.
Yes.
To your point, a lot of women are basically running their homes, running their families, running their
Yes.
careers. So oftentimes they've got a million things that they're juggling and can't always go into a healthcare setting. And so having that virtual option is super important. I'm curious if a patient is going to work with you and your team, how
How does that
does
work?
how does it work with the rest of the providers or
Yeah.
specialists that they may be working with as well?
That's great. I mean, the way that we're primarily engaging with health systems is as a care extender. So we, as a care extension platform, the patients still belong to their cardiologist or their primary care doctor, whoever it may be. But if they meet eligibility criteria that we all agree on, we can enroll them into Systole, which should mitigate the need for that patient to see that physician as frequently as they normally would. It's not that they're being taken away or taken out. They're junted into this platform where they're getting optimized so that they're referring their primary cardiologist or primary care doctor can then see a little bit more time back. Oh, they can
Oh,
see more patients who've been waiting. I think about somebody that everyone has this stories like this, but within the year, well after these COVID shutdowns, I saw a woman who'd been waiting 12 months as a new patient for chest pain
wow.
evaluation. And it's just crazy, right? So I think that to give the provider back a little bit more time so they can see more new patients or have more time to spend with the truly complicated follow-up patients, that is how that works. So not good for somebody as a new patient, but someone who's already been seen. There's an action plan in place. We are sort of a mechanism for really implementing that action plan. And further, I think this is not something the average boots on the ground clinician cares about, but that the sort of higher ups with their business hats on care about at the health system. We can help really tighten the engagement and the relationship of the patient to that health system. Some other symptom comes up, see urology at that health system. You're overdue for your colonoscopy, make sure you get it done, and let's send a bunch of communications to make it happen. So I think that there's those two layers of value, but that is the patient journey, that they still see their doctor. This is supplemental, not supplanting
Sure.
their usual care. It's just that usual care can now space out quite a bit.
Got it. And I know you touched on a little bit of the patient feedback, but would love to hear more since you've started. What are some of the success stories from women that have used your platform?
Oh my gosh. Well, there's just a paper published yesterday, I think, in one of our big cardiology prevention journals about how women with actual established heart disease, stent, stroke, heart attack, are less likely to be prescribed statins than men. It's like so wild, but they're less likely to be prescribed this highly evidence-based guideline-directed treatment, pillar of therapy. Even if they're offered it, they're less likely to accept it, more likely to discontinue it. And therefore, at 1 year, they have higher LDL cholesterol levels, which is one of the major determinants of risk of having another heart attack or needing another stent and everything. And so some of our biggest success stories that I will never forget are people who have come in, women who've come in with a lot of skepticism, really shaped by this incredible landscape of misinformation around statin and cholesterol and lipid lowering. And so there's this one group that had a woman with blockages who fortunately had not yet had a heart attack, but she had a very high LDL cholesterol level. And she was in a group with several other women who also had high LDLs, different flavors, right? One had genetically high, one just run of the mill, but she had had a cardiac arrest and had survived it. She had died and come back to life. And there's another woman who's just doing
Oh man.
standard prevention. So a hodgepodge. And they all were either on, except for this one woman, on statins or starting statins. And at the beginning, she was so worried about it. And she was injecting all these supplements into her body and everything, but
No.
nervous about statins. And I just remember the patients themselves, the other women would be asking her, tell us what you're afraid of. What have you read? What are you worried about? So different coming from a regular person than a doctor in a white coat. Then as time goes on, she had a family loss. Someone else had a family loss. They started praying for each other. Then at the end of the program, these women who'd started statins, they got their cholesterol labs back and they all were so thrilled about these massive reductions. And she said, she had a Southern accent. She was like, I don't want to be the high one, y'all. She felt left out that they had all these exciting reductions in their numbers and she didn't. And it really encouraged her. So she declared that she would start something, but we ended the program without her having done it. And then a few weeks later, she did write back and say, I took my first dose. And I'm still alive. Everything is fine. And she was so excited to later report her own reduction. So, I mean, I think those kinds of examples will stick with me forever about the power of community as medicine, as well as actual evidence-based medicine and science coming together to help people overcome all the typical barriers that are so well described in the literature to move the needle. I mean, she's probably added years onto her life. So there's things like that. We've seen incredible reductions in blood pressure. We've seen incredible reductions in weight. And then these big lifestyle changes with people just saying really simply that knowing that they're going to come back the next week or the next month is the reason that they actually sort of put one foot in front of the other or tried tofu for the first time or whatever. So I think we've had a lot of that. And I think all the time, because I do still practice part-time to keep me honest, just think all the time about what I'm doing in clinic at Mass General Brigham versus what I'm doing at Systole. And it's a completely different type of care. Like, I cannot, without just committing to going way over time and really upsetting the people who are scheduled last in the day, upsetting my entire family when I get home hours later than I said I would. I can't give the kind of care that I'm doing at Systole in a health system unless I just run late. So it's been great. And those are the kinds of things that we really hold on to and put up there as the North Star to just rinse and repeat.
Love that. And I completely agree with you about community. I think it's so important. And especially when there's a lot of fear and uncertainty
Yes.
and wanting to do what's best for you, but sometimes that fear can be so strong. And when you see other women who are or have gone through it and they're okay. And it's something that I had to learn the the hard way, and one of the reasons why I started the Women's Health podcast. But having not everyone thinks providers are great.
Right.
They are fearful, they mistrust, and there's reasons for that, and I can totally see it. But having parents who were both doctors, I had that as my initial thought, and then over time could start to see how that could be different for other people. And so I love that that has been some of the outcomes and experiences for women that have gone through your platform and the community aspect. Double clicking on that one point you made in terms of there has just been this really big either missile or misdiagnosis or fear for women getting treatment or getting diagnosed for cardiovascular condition. What do you think are those underlying reasons and why so many women feel that way and why the healthcare system kind of evolved in that way?
Yeah, so interesting. I mean, the disparities are really marked. Take women with heart attacks. Time to getting them into the cath lab is usually longer. Where they can get stented, have these life-saving procedures. The likelihood that they get offered all these important medical therapies even after a heart attack is lower. The likelihood that they die after a heart attack is higher compared to men. And then just for the prevention work, we just talked about cholesterol, but very similar things can be observed for blood pressure, et cetera. Why is this? It's more complex than any one explanation. On the provider side, bias, lack of training, maybe obviously of structural forces. On the patient side, though, right, there's been very well documented fall in awareness within all adult women that heart disease is still the leading cause of death. There's this rising misperception that cancer is the leading threat to our longevity when heart disease still kills more women every year than all forms of cancer combined. So I think those all come together in a toxic way where if women don't know what they need to know, then they're not going to advocate for themselves, and they're not going to ask the questions that they need to ask. Oh, what do you think about that blood pressure of 135 over 81? Is that really okay? Or is my LDL actually okay? You have this family history, right? If they don't know this, they're not going to really push. And obviously, if physicians are not adequately trained, which I was lucky to train at one of the best places in the country for cardiology, but we really didn't have more than a lecture or two about women's cardiovascular health. So did I come out of training with a template, a checklist about screening every woman I see for things that came up during pregnancy, when menopause happened, whether she had hot flashes, all these things that we know can modulate someone's downstream risk? No, I didn't. And I came to do it just because of my own interest. But I think that we have a lot of work to do to make sure that under diagnosis, under treatment, under optimization, then goes away over time.
Yeah, that still blows my mind. That has been very small or even non-existent for understanding the differences and how we can better approach it for women patients that come in. So I want to switch over to the last segment, which is always my favorite, where we talk about myths, taboos, and just unfiltered real talk about women's health. And
Mhm.
so want to kick it off with the first question. What's the biggest myth about women's heart health that you've heard?
So the biggest myth about women's heart health that I've heard is that women experience heart attacks differently. Okay. I mean, I think it's true at some level, but
Mhm.
within the startup tech space, there's high frequency of people stating that women don't have heart attacks the way men do. There was a big study called the Virgo study published, I think, in 2018, where researchers surveyed people who came in with demonstrated heart attacks to a hospital, men and women, and they asked them all about their symptoms, how they came in, looked at how they were worked up, the likelihood that they had blood work done, et cetera, et cetera. And 90% of women, like 90% of men, had chest pain when they were having a
Oh.
heart attack. So women get chest pain when they have a heart attack, the vast majority of the time. However, I think this is where it's a little bit more nuanced than what I led with. Women were much more likely than men with heart attacks to have additional symptoms other than chest pain. This might be fatigue, shortness of breath, indigestion, sweatiness, palpitations, right? And those extra symptoms often muddied the waters, not just for the physicians who were less likely to send blood work, to do an EKG, to consider cardiac causes of chest pain, but also to the patients themselves. The women were more likely to wait longer to come in. They were more likely to
Mm.
attribute their presentation to stress. So I think I always share this with our patients that if you have chest pain, especially if it's related to exertion or if it's coming on suddenly and strongly at rest, it's really not unreasonable to think cardiac pain, something related to your heart, and not to dismiss it just because you're a woman. But then the follow-up is if you're having all these other symptoms, but you still have chest pain, still take it seriously. So that's probably one of the biggest myths that I see out there in people who I'm excited are increasingly paying attention to women's heart health, and so it becomes more important to get the facts right.
Yeah, it's something that even I didn't realize. That's another myth that I believe that there is differences. So it's, as you said, more nuance to that, that there are these other symptoms that women could experience, but it's not that they don't experience the chest pain.
Right.
Another one I wanted to ask you is what's one of your hottest takes about women's heart health?
I think that women's heart health, anyone who cares about women's health should be paying more attention to heart health. I think that in our domain, in our world, women's health 1.0 was infertility. Women's health
Hmm.
2.0, I would say we're in it right now, is menopause.
Oh, yeah.
And now we're in this weird transitional. I mean, it's like 2.5. There's a lot of talk about longevity. Before we hopped on here, I just looked at a bunch of the other women's health players and their websites, and they're all increasingly have tabs and offerings and pages and LinkedIn posts about longevity and everything. I think my hot take would be, though, that if you are in women's health and you care, give a damn about longevity, you gotta address the boring problems of blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, and it might not be ranked high on SEO. But if you really want to help people live longer, women, then you got to address the leading cause of death, which is heart disease.
Yeah, it sounds so obvious, but nothing in women's health as
Yeah,
that I see as obvious has been obvious. So that's why we keep having these conversations and highlighting the different offerings and topics that are really important for women to truly understand. As menopause is hot, which I love that.
I love
I'm
that
glad it's
too.
being talked about, but heart health is also very important and should be seen in combination with all of these other aspects of women's health.
And I feel like I get it as a founder, as someone building a business. Like there are realities to markets that form and markets that don't. And I'll never forget seeing Joanna Strober of MIDI speak once about their learnings from consumer marketing and SEO that women in their target audience are searching for symptoms related to menopause, searching for things like heart attack, right? I mean, until you probably after the fact. And I think that that may be a consumer reality at the surface. I think that if I were to offer another hot take though, as for just based on
Always.
my experience as a physician in taking care of these women is that maybe what they're searching for on Google or TikTok. But I almost always find that underneath whatever questions they have or concerns they have about the scale or the hot flashes or sleep, that they are very worried about their health on a deeper level. And they are aware usually that they might not know what technically is a normal blood pressure or normal cholesterol, but they are aware usually that things have been sliding. And they often have people depending on them. I mean, maybe it's kids, maybe it's aging parents, maybe it's both, and they are worried about being there for the people who need them. So I think, yes, there may be objective things we can point to in consumer marketing data, and I think investors get excited about that too. But I think there's this consumer psychology and the existence of a market in of itself, I do think exists subterranean, a little bit under that top of mind, superficial, more symptom driven layer of what we've seen so far in the menopause market. So it'll be interesting to see how it all evolves. But now is as good of a time as ever to really be expanding our concept of women's health, whether it's for the patients that we serve, whether it's as investors, as builders, the entire ecosystem.
Yes, I completely agree. And before wrapping up this amazing conversation, which I could go on for hours, where can people find you and find more information on Systole Health?
We love our website. Shout out to TCA, which is a great all women led firm that does design and marketing and all this thoughtful work on websites. So our website, SystoleHealth.com. And for better, for worse, we are on social media like everyone else. So TikTok is where we're reaching patients, Systole MD at the moment, but yeah, Systole Health on Instagram. And we try to share learnings from our journey on LinkedIn as well. So for anyone listening who feels like they resonated with any of this, we'd love to hear from them and obviously help in any way that we can. But it's been such a pleasure, and we love the work that you're doing on this podcast.
Thank you so much. And I love the work that you're doing too. I'm excited to see what you guys continue to build. And I hope more women start thinking about their heart health as exciting as menopause. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
That's a wrap on this week's episode of Let's Be Heard. I hope you enjoyed this episode and learned the importance of knowing your own heart health. Big thanks to Simin Lee for sharing her path to cardiology and how that led to her journey starting Systole Health. Want to learn more about Systole Health? Check out the links in the show notes. And if you can't get enough of LBH, hit subscribe and follow our podcast on Instagram. See you next time, LBH crew.